Alright, so let's see here. Where did I leave off? I left off with switches. I left off with my grandmother. Ooh, I got a story for you. Oh, it's a great story. So, one of the last stories that I told you was my cousin moved in, and he was an asshole. Now, I mean, growing up as a kid, you listen to people, and sometimes you get scared, sometimes you get worried. My cousin, the screwdriver incident. I was 4 or 5 years old. He was, I think, 16 or 17. So he was almost an adult. But he was still a kid himself. But he had these little kids living in the house with him, so he loved to tell stories. Now, right across the street from my grandmother's house, this was back in the 80s. I don't know how many of you guys grew up here in Bradenton in the 80s, but back in the 80s, Bradenton wasn't really that big of a thing. You know, land development was just starting in the 80s. Back in the 80s, you had, let's see, there was an Albertsons out on Manatee Avenue. There was a Winn-Dixie on 41, or no, on Cortez and 75th. There was a Publix on 51st and Cortez, and there was another Publix on 41 and Cortez. I mean, there was a couple other grocery stores, but like a lot of Bradenton was undeveloped land. So right across the street from my grandmother's house, there was this huge wooded area, and it went from, this was over in Samoset, by the way, and Samoset was definitely not developed. And my cousin used to tell us kids a story about the mud woman that lived out there, and he told the story. He moved in, I think, when I was 4, and he told the story for a whole year. Scared the shit out of all those kids. And because of that, we never left the yard unless our parents took us someplace. Well, a little bit of time passed, and my mom and my dad, they'd been working for about a year and a half, and we moved. We moved into our own place, and we moved over off of 75th, and that's where I really grew up. That's where I started. I mean, I'd already been in school, but I changed schools. Oh, wait a minute. Before I go to that, I learned how to ride a bike while I was living in my grandmother's house. I went to Samoset Elementary, and there was this guy. I don't think he wasn't my teacher. I think he might have been a teacher there, or he just might have been some guy that was there. I don't know. But on the playground, this guy, he had a couple bikes out there, and he was teaching kids how to ride bikes. So he got me up on the bike, and the first time, obviously, he like held the bike for a minute and I let it go, and I fell. And after a couple days, he kept doing this. One day, I was getting there, and he barely had his hand on the bike, and I was kind of going, but he was still there to steady me on occasion. And then I fell, and the next time that I went to do it, when he let go, he grabbed it back and he pushed me. And that's the first time I broke my nose. Now, if you guys are looking at this right now, you can see the curve. Big old huge curve. That's the first time I broke my nose. But anyway, so we moved to a new place, and this would be the neighborhood that I grew up in. I was 5 years old when I moved in. Five, maybe six, when I moved in this neighborhood. And the best parts of my life, as a child at least, were right there. Friends that I would carry on even till this day. You guys don't know them. Nobody else knows them. But I do. We talk all the time. So, moved to this neighborhood. And, it's 80s. And like I said, Bradenton was not a big place. And this was a new development. This was one of the new burbs. We moved there, and I went from going to Samoset Elementary to Moody. It was a duplex, but it was a three-bedroom duplex. My sister shared a room. I had my own room. My parents had their room. But it was a block neighborhood. This is where things started. I'm not going to tell you what. This comes later in the story. And I'll remind you about this later. But this is where the downfall of the house started. So, start going to Moody, moved in this neighborhood. The first people I met was Travis, CJ, Billy, and Bobby. Travis and CJ, they're important parts of the story. We'll get to them later. Billy, not so much important. Bobby. Bobby was important. But Bobby wasn't important because of who he was. He was a normal kid. He was a younger, short, fat kid. Bobby's important because I make him important. Bobby's important because his mom makes him important. Bobby's mom, her name was Kim, and she was the neighborhood mom. In the area that we lived in, once again, unincorporated Bradenton, big, huge wooded area. Bobby's mom was a hippie. Kim was a big church woman. I mean, I don't want to push that to the side, but she was a big hippie, and she loved doing things that we all loved to do. And when I said she was a neighborhood mom, back in the 80s, you guys remember, we used to hang out in the neighborhood. The moment the sun came up during the summer, we could go out the front door. This back in the day when your parents left you at home alone. I mean, you're 3 years old. Your parents they'd leave you. They had the I'll call once, let it ring 2 times, hang up, and call right back. And if you don't answer the phone, I'm going to come rushing up, type thing. Well, Kim, her husband, did very well. and she was always home. So during the summertime, she was the neighborhood mom. So she would take us out in the woods, and she we built this huge treehouse. It was me and probably 15 neighborhood kids between the ages of 5 and 8. Sometimes my mom, sometimes her husband, sometimes other kids' moms or dads. And we built this big, huge treehouse thing, and we actually ran electricity. And I'm talking like 500 feet of electric wire from people's houses to this treehouse. We used to catch baby ducks. We used to raise these baby ducks. We used to fish in the pond. We used to swim in the pond. But the biggest thing was, when we built this treehouse, it was big enough for every kid that ever put his hand into part of building. We made sure that everybody had a spot. And this went on for many, many years. Much time. Now, as a kid, I was talking about Travis and CJ. Travis and CJ were the bullies. Now, you guys know me right now. I'm not a tall guy. I'm shorter than most people. Because I was so I didn't break 5 foot until I was almost in the 10th grade. So obviously I was a short guy. So if you can imagine me at 6, 7 years old, I was really small. Travis and CJ's were the bullies. Bullied me forever. Within one day, I met the Johnsons. Ryan, Monica, and Ryan would become my first lifelong friend. Me and Ryan, the way it happened was I used to swim in the lake or the pond, whatever you want to call it, right there in the neighborhood. And I was out swimming one day. And when I was swimming back in, there was this kid, and he was looking for shells. Well, Florida's full of shells. Even if you're inland, you can still dig and find shells. I swam in, and I met Ryan. And that was the changing point. As far as I can think of, that was the first changing point in my life. I mean, by this time, I'd seen my mom and dad argue. I'd wake up in the mornings, and I'd see my mom with a bruise. By this time, I'd been through my dad beating me and everything else. We're going to try to stay away from negatives in the whole journal. I'm going to point out some things. But I've seen and gone through enough that meeting a best friend and having a best friend, it was an important moment in my life. And it was a moment that was going to change the rest of my life. And the fact that meeting this person and knowing this person for the next 30 years completely changed me. Knowing that right now, this guy right here, is talking to you, telling this story, knowing how important that is, changed me. So next time we'll pick up with my best friend, and we'll go a little bit further.